Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Conrad with AIM Transportation Solutions, and I'm joined by AIM's Senior Vice President of Sales Operations, Dan Fleming, who will be taking us through today's topic focused on emission regulations and the trucking industry. As I'm sure all of you know, stricter and stricter emission regulations have been rolling out over the last several years, requiring new technology, resulting in higher costs, and in some cases, even changing the way companies operate their fleets. And with additional and even stricter regulations waiting in the wings, such as the big rule taking effect in 2027, the pressure and cost fleet operators will have to bear will increase significantly. And while these sweeping emission regulations present challenges for many businesses, especially those running commercial vehicles across state lines, preparing now and taking the necessary proactive measures will help mitigate the impact on your business. And a critical component of this is, of course, just knowing what to be prepared for. And that's why Dan is here to give us all a high level look at where the industry is heading when it comes to these emission regulations coming down from organizations like the Environmental Protection Agency and the California Air Resources Board. So aside from just being a source of information for you, which we're happy to be, another way AIM can help mitigate the impact of these regulations is by being your full service truck leasing partner. You know, as 2027 approaches, the industry is going to head into a pre-buy phase in which companies will begin acquiring trucks ahead of the regulation deadline in order to save money and avoid the operational complexities that will come along with the new technologies the 2027 rule is mandating. And it's important to note that with the increase in demand as a result of this pre-buy, this will highly likely result in OEMs shifting back into an allocational manufacturing model. So think back to what we all went through right after the pandemic, in which there were only so many truck build slots to go around. So really, the best thing you can do to save money and avoid those operational headaches is to act now by securing the equipment you need before the deadline. And we're ready to help you do just that. You know, AIM proudly partners with the industry's top brands to get our customers the trucks and equipment they need for their unique operations. So if you want to hear more about AIM's full service leasing program or any of our other services, such as commercial truck rentals, maintenance, dedicated contract carriage, freight brokerage, or used truck sales, or anything else about our award-winning family-owned and operated company, please feel free to reach out to me after today's session, and I would be more than happy to help. My contact information is in the webinar invites that everyone on this call received. So with that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to Dan. One note, Dan will take questions after his presentation, so please hang on to any you might have until Dan has wrapped up. So Dan, if you are ready, sir, you can take it away.
Conrad, thanks so much for that introduction. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. This topic is critically important, but not that exciting. So it's my great honor and challenge to try to make something that's a little dry and complicated as interesting and easy to understand as possible. So the first thing that I want to mention, just to get right out of the way, is that I'm not an engineer and I'm not a lawyer, and I did not stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. I am not, cannot provide legal advice to you, but I think all that we at AIM are trying to do is to give you enough information to ask the right questions. Those of us at AIM may not have 100% of the answers right at off the bat, but the great thing about our company is that our expertise is to bring our customers and others the answers through our deep connections and involvement in the industry for more than 100 years. So we lean on our great partners, as Conrad already mentioned, as well as our involvement on the legislative arena. And just briefly about myself, I'm honored to be a board member of the Truck Renting and Leasing Association, which is our trade association that ably represents our industry, both federally and around the country, and is highly involved in these rules. And I'm also honored to be a member of the board of the Virginia Trucking Association, who also is obviously very involved in my home state of Virginia. So not only myself, but other of my colleagues at AIM are equally as involved in the industry and can get you the answers you need. So please feel free to reach out to anyone at our team, and they can get me involved or get anyone else involved and get you the answers to the questions you might have. So I know I talk to some people and they say, I'm not in California. Why in the world would I care about this stuff? That's their problem. Let them deal with it out west. Well, my answer is that AIM's not in California either, but the EPA rules are going to impact all 50 states starting in 2027, for which we need to start planning for today, as Conrad already mentioned. But additionally, and I'm going to cover this later in my slides, there's 10 other states that are adopting the California Air Resources rules to varying degrees that's going to impact all of us here very soon. So what are we talking about? We're talking about, as the slide mentions, the greenhouse gas rule, part 3. The other parts that came down really honestly didn't have a major impact on us users of the technology. A lot of it was gained through aerodynamic efficiencies, behind the scenes, I guess I would say, through the creativity and the expertise and engineering prowess of many of our OEM partners, both on the engine side but on the chassis side, to meet those regulations. So now that GHG 3 is coming down the pike for 2027, though, I think some of that onus clearly moves on to us, the users, because the technology is going to change fairly drastically, and we're going to cover it as best we can in this slide presentation. But then also CARB has some of the unique rules that we're going to cover, which includes the omnibus emissions, the electric truck mandates, as well as the truck inspection mandates and the refrigeration mandates that also are a factor. So there's so much there. And then just keep in mind that traveling into California can trigger enforcement. So literally just driving a truck across the border into California can trigger your company to fall under some of these requirements. So we want you to think about that as well. Just by way of background, I covered this before, but so people know, the California Air Resources Board was authorized by the federal government and the EPA in 1967. So essentially, they were given the right and the ability to create regulations that are separate from the Environmental Protection Agency, and they're allowed to enforce them in the state of California. Well, in addition to just California, other states were given the right to adopt the California rules as well. So those states have a right to either adopt the EPA rule or adopt separate CARB rules, but they have to adopt each rule completely as California has written it. They have no ability to only adopt certain aspects of each rule. But as you'll see when we go through the presentation, they can adopt one rule and reject another rule. And that's just an important point to make once we get to the bigger details. So just a closer look at NOx regulations. There's a lot of numbers on this screen, certainly way more than I'd expect you to absorb in this presentation. But thanks to our friends at International Trucks, this really is a nice little outline of the emissions requirements for the EPA rules versus the California Air Resources Board rules. And really, the reason I wanted to share this is you will see that in 2027, they align. And I think almost everyone on this call is also aware that originally there were to be, in 2024, unique CARB rules that were going into effect. They had CARB had a settlement with the engine manufacturers to agree to not enforce those new NOx rules. Omnibus is what they had been called in calendar year 24 and 25, but calendar year 26 remained a little vague out there. I don't want to speak for everybody. If I'm looking into my crystal ball, I think California is more than likely, as I've heard them say, look the other way for 2026. It's just not practical to enforce it simply because of engine availability. All of our great engine manufacturing partners have been focused in on meeting the 2027 requirements, and they're headed there and feel very confident they're going to have good technological solutions to meet that. But to try to meet a separate standard early wasn't practical. The reason I mention that is 2026 does bring about some vagaries that are making this process a little less than clear than we were hoping. So if anyone has any specific questions or needs to see this slide, again, this particular slide was shared by our friends at International, and be happy to pass them this along, although it's readily available. So again, this is an eye chart, and don't worry, I'm going to focus in on a specific part of it. But the CARB OEM mandate information through the ACT rule we're going to get to later, that's at the bottom, and the ACF as well. So, but let's focus in on the top portion of this slide, which is the EPA greenhouse gas requirements. You saw on the last slide that there's going to be requirements for 0.035 grams horsepower of NOx emissions. Well, in addition to that, part of the GH3 rules are averaging across OEM fleets. So similar to CAFE standards, if we're familiar with automobiles and how the automobile manufacturers have to average the fuel economy standards of their trucks, their vehicles, similarly, OEMs are going to be required to sell portions of their fleet as zero emission in order to meet the standards of the GHG3, which kick in 2027. The one significant difference between California rules and EPA rules is that the EPA rule recognizes other technologies as zero emission vehicle. Specifically, the one that comes to mind is burning of hydrogen in an engine. For those of us that attended the ACT conference over the last several years in May, in particular, what comes to mind is our friends at Cummins that have done a lot of work on a common architecture for an engine that can burn hydrogen with a spark. So the reason I mention that is not to just single out one of our great partners, but the fact that that spark is against everything CARB seems to stand for. And so they are refusing to accept that engine as a zero emission. Whereas the EPA, I think, takes a larger view of this and understands that the emissions benefit of that particular technology that some OEMs are looking at really could be a good way to meet the ZEV requirements. So again, the ZEV requirements in California are pretty much limited to battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell, which would be a whole other topic about how a fuel cell works that's above my pay grade. Whereas federally, the standards are, I'll say, more open, but more accepting of alternate technologies such as burning of hydrogen. So that was a lot of information and details, but you can certainly, again, follow up with us. We will get you in touch with our OEM partners. But again, what does this mean to me? This means, as you see on this chart right here, that starting in 2027, OEMs are going to be required to sell a certain number of zero emission vehicles to meet the GHG Phase 3 rules. So in addition to some of that new engine technology that we're going to talk about when we get to the next slides to meet these requirements, additionally, they're going to be required to hit these percents of ZEV vehicle sales nationwide. So that's going to impact all of us in all 50 states. I think that's the bottom of line of this slide. Now we get into some of the considerations of some of the CARB rules that apply to other states. Again, our friends at Daimler Truck Freightliner did a really nice summary that I'm borrowing from them here that really runs through the rules. On the left, you can see the omnibus low NOx rule that really applies in California, but also applies in Massachusetts and Oregon. Again, we already discussed they had the settlement, so by 2027, they're really going to align. But the reason I also wanted to show this slide is some of the other rules we're going to be discussing later on, specifically the Advanced Clean Truck rule that impacts these states that I have listed here, some of which kicks in January of 25, which we'll cover. But the reason I wanted to cover this slide here today is the part there that says must have CARB certification to idle. That is the sticker that many of us are now familiar with on the hood of trucks that shows the state of California and says certified to idle in California. Essentially, we have two options when we're acquiring trucks. One is California idle standards. Two is national EPA idle standards. A national EPA idle standard truck will not be allowed to idle at all in California, Massachusetts, Oregon, or the state of Pennsylvania. And I think many people forget about that. The state of Pennsylvania has adopted this CARB certification, mainly because they do have a non-attainment area, and so they have to meet those. They're required by the Clean Air Act to meet certain standards. They feel that this will help. So I'm going to cover on the next slide some engine availability, but I wanted you to keep this in mind that it's not just California, but if you operate in Massachusetts or Pennsylvania, even if you just drive into those states, you will only be allowed to idle in those states if you have the California Clean Air sticker on your truck. So please keep that in mind. And some of the other details on this slide we're going to discuss when we get into the ACT rule, Advanced Clean Truck Rule. So I think I already alluded to our friends at Cummins. Again, I'm trying to show the love to a lot of our OEM partners that AIM works with, and certainly Cummins Power is a critically important partner of ours, and AIM's proud to offer Cummins Power options across the gamut of the different truck manufacturers that we're happy to work with. But I want to show some of the engines, whether you're familiar or not. The X15 is the standard bearer for the long haul engine. There's the current X15, which is available today and available through part of calendar year 2026. And I know this is confusing. You say, Dan, what exactly does that mean? Originally, Cummins had announced that their X15 platform was not going to be available after January 1st of 2026. They've since announced some change to that, and the traditional legacy engine will be available partway through calendar year 2026. But what will become available is the new Cummins engine technology, the new X15 engine, that is this red line right here that becomes available January 1 of 2026. This engine, for purposes of the CARB regulations and the EPA GHG3 rules, will meet the requirements for those regulations. Again, you can ask your Cummins professionals about all the details, but they are using credits that they have acquired and built up, and through the sale of their natural gas engine that you see is also available. They are producing an engine that produces 0.05 gram horsepower NOx, but is allowed to be sold and qualifies because of the other, again, balancing, as I mentioned on the previous slide. Finally, the X15 engine that they are releasing will replace the L9 engine that many of us are familiar with. The L9 engine is going to be sold through 2026, so up until January 27, and the new X10 engine, though, will also be available in 2026. But then finally, the reason I wanted to mention this slide, and probably the most drastic and different change for us, is that the traditional Cummins B67 engine is the engine that powers the straight trucks of almost all of our partners. That engine, as we know it, will only be available through calendar year 2025. And please take note, this is one major factor that Conrad was alluding to as an introduction. After January 1 of 2026, that traditional medium-duty straight truck engine that you're familiar with will no longer be available. There will be a new Cummins octane engine that's available, and then their new 7.2 diesel mid-range engine will come out January 27. So again, for more details, please reach out to your AIM professional, and they can put you in touch with our partners at Cummins. But these CARB rules, these rules are really, not only restricted to CARB, but also come into play for the EPA GHG3 rules. And really is something that all of us have to consider that has been a little bit under the radar for most folks. So Please work with your AIM professional to do some fleet planning, as Conrad alluded to. We're expecting many of the OEMs to come into an allocated process again, partway through next year, where we're all going to have our ducks in a row to make sure we get the technology that we need to meet the rules. Some of the other important rules that are coming out of CARB that I'd like to touch on today are already alluded to: the Advanced Clean Truck Rule, the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule that had received quite a bit of press previous years, the Heavy Truck Inspection and Maintenance Rule, and the TRUE Rule, the Truck Refrigeration Units Rule. And some of these rules actually are already in effect, but have had a stay of enforcement, and therefore I think it's kind of fallen off of some of our radars. So again, this slide is thanks to our partners out at Cummins, but I thought while it looks a little busy, it really has some nice information about what state is implementing which rule. So just going from left to right by year, 2024, clearly we see California out in front as expected. 2025, again, California out in front with the omnibus rule, but this column, the ACT rule, is what I'm going to be discussing, and really we all need to pay attention to. As the slide says here about the quick facts, ACT is a rule that requires OEM truck manufacturers to meet a certain percent of sales in each state being zero-emission vehicles. See my previous conversation about what a zero-emission vehicle is. Basically, today, that means a battery electric vehicle, because this is a California rule, not the EPA rule. So therefore, manufacturers are required to sell a certain percent of battery electric vehicles starting in January 1 of 2025. Yes, that's 2.5 months from now. In California, which they already had been required to do, Oregon, Massachusetts, Washington State, New York, and New Jersey. In other words, in New York and New Jersey and Massachusetts, this is the first time this is coming to the East Coast. If you want to acquire a vehicle, there are limitations on the OEMs of how many diesel units they can sell, because they're required by law to sell a certain number of battery electric vehicles in that state. So there are going to be restrictions on how many diesel trucks all of us can acquire in a particular state without acquiring battery electric vehicles. So I'll just stand up for our OEM partners. Don't get mad at the messenger. They are implementing a challenging rule that's coming out of California. And as I also mentioned earlier in the presentation, while these states have the right to postpone the enforcement of this rule, they do not have the right to alter the rule in any way. In other words, they're in the ACT program or they're out of the ACT program. And I know AIM is actively involved through the Truck Renting and Leasing Association, as well as in particular the Trucking Association of New York, to talk to the folks up in Albany about perhaps a delay in these rules. That's always a possibility, but where we sit today, these rules are coming into effect in January 1 of 2025. Finally, the ACF rule, which is a little confusing, is the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule. That is the other half of the equation, which requires fleets to purchase a certain number of trucks. I'll go into a little more detail on a later slide. Just two things to say. One, California is the only state that has implemented this rule. But two, the enforcement of this rule technically is stayed right now because they're waiting for an EPA waiver. Additionally, there's some lawsuits that blocked the start of that. So the CARB was forced to hold enforcement on this. Depending on the outcome of some of those lawsuits and other things, obviously those requirements could come into place right away. So if you operate into California, certainly be aware of that. But then what I also want to bring to your attention in 2027 on this slide is we not only have the GH3 rules that I already discussed, but the ACT rule that I already mentioned also will go into effect in Vermont, Colorado, New Mexico, Rhode Island, and Maryland, which I think is quite shocking to some folks to see that those requirements for OEMs to sell battery electric vehicles is coming to their state. And then you see there's a potential to adopt still in Nevada, Virginia, North Carolina, Hawaii, and the District of Columbia. They have not adopted it, but they're in deep political discussions to adopt it, depending on which party is in power. So I hope that there's a lot on that slide. Again, we can share some of this information later. Conrad would make that available if you reached out to him, but I want you to keep that in mind. So what is the Advanced Clean Truck Rule specifically? The Advanced Clean Truck Rule specifically requires these manufacturers to sell ZEVs as a percentage sales. So these model years align with the California adoption, and any state that I noted that adopts it in 2025, for example, just bump this up. So for example, the state of New York that adopts this in 2025, 5% of class 2B to 3 vehicle sales will need to be zero emissions, 9% of class 4 through 8, and 5% of class 7 and 8 tractors will need to be zero emission vehicles in the state of New York, New Jersey, and Massachusetts, January 1 of 2025. Again, the OEM's hands are tied. This is what the rule as it's currently adopted in those states. And you can see how quickly these requirements start to ramp up. Moving on just again to show what we discussed before on that other slide, these states in blue have fully adopted ACT by different years. Again, New York, New Jersey, and Massachusetts coming online January 1 of 2025. But as I already mentioned, Vermont, Maryland, Colorado, those states are going to come online just a year later. So again, please keep that in mind. And my reason for sharing this is, as again, Conrad kicked off at the beginning, if you have plans to update your fleet, please work with, if we're honored to work with you directly through AIM or however you acquire your vehicles to address your needs prior to 2027, especially if you operate in those states. So as I already mentioned, there's the other half of the equation, the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this rule because, as I've already said, right now this is only adopted by California and there is a stay in enforcement. However, if I was a betting man, I would bet that EPA, before the end of the Biden administration, is going to issue the waiver to California, which would allow California to enforce this in their state. But that's to be seen. But what this requires is folks who operate vehicles to purchase battery electric vehicles. The incongruence in the rule in the states of Jersey, New York, and Massachusetts in particular is the OEMs are required to sell battery electrics, but no one is required to buy the battery electrics. Well, how are they going to go about doing that? As I already mentioned in a previous slide, we saw the OEMs are forced to have a formula to say for a certain number of traditional internal combustion engine vehicles that you buy, you're going to have to buy a certain number of battery electrics. Well, in California, they thought about those problems and they passed this Advanced Clean Fleet Rule on the user side. So in California, there are requirements for folks that operate any vehicles in California to meet these targets of 10%, 25, 50, where it ramps up each year by group. Again, California being the only state that has adopted this rule. However, if your vehicle runs into California, in other words, any of, let's say, AIM's great customers in the Phoenix, Arizona area that touches California, all of a sudden you have a California fleet and you would have to comply with purchase of battery electric vehicles. To say, how would you comply? That's a whole other discussion that CARB doesn't have answers for. But please keep in mind that if you are on the West Coast and touch California, you could potentially be required under the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule to purchase a certain number of battery electric vehicles. And then, of course, as the previous slide alluded to, there are certain states that are considering adoption of the ACF rule, and I think they're waiting to see what happens with some of the legal challenges that are going on with the ACF rule right now. Next, I wanted to move into something that I think has fallen off folks' radar a little bit, but is very much still in play. January 1 of 2024, the Clean Truck Check, or the heavy-duty inspection and maintenance rules for California, were expected to come online. Because of technical issues, availability of testing stations, availability of equipment, California Air Resources Board agreed to delay enforcement until October 1st. But by October 1st, any vehicles running anywhere into California can only run in if they've been inspected and have been certified and registered with the California Air Resources Board through their database. I'm proud to announce that AIM's maintenance team has been advanced and very involved in this rule, has done a lot of training, has acquired the equipment in order to be able to do the inspections required for this. But similar to DOT rules, our customers themselves, in other words, the operator of the vehicle, you all, would be required to register with the California Air Resources Board directly and pay a $30 fee to register that truck to prove that it has passed the heavy-duty inspection and maintenance vehicle requirements. Now, we have been notified by some of our customers that have gone into California. Right now, the test is not required. As I said, it was stayed until October 1st, but the registration requirement was in effect. So if you're running into the state of California today, you are required to have your truck registered with CARB through their website and pay the $30 annual fee to have it registered to prove that it's authorized to run in the state of California. And that test will have to be complete prior to October 1st, which has to be registered again through CARB's website. AIMS personnel in Phoenix and Chicagoland in particular are trained and have the tools to be able to complete this, and we would love to work with any of our customers that need to run into California. So my message is, if your fleet needs to run into California, please reach out to your AIM representative. Let us guide you to the right place. It's not a challenging process to register with them, but still it's another bureaucratic hurdle to get over, and a $30 fee per vehicle. Part of the Clean Truck Check here is, roadside emission monitoring, but mainly they are going to be checking compliance verification. Just to continue on this, some of these rules particularly require that the recipient of goods, so any warehouse or any facility that you, our customers, might be delivering to in the state of California, would need to show proof that your trucks making deliveries to them must comply with these inspection rules. So it's really a brave new world that CARB is trying to get to. The bottom line is, if you touch California, please talk to us about how we can help you get in compliance. Finally, I don't want to forget about refrigeration units. This is also something that some folks have seen fall off the radar a little bit. These rules went into effect January 1 of 2024. They require a certain percentage of truck refrigeration units. I'm talking about truck units in particular, not trailer units. Those operate under a different rule. But truck refrigeration units, percents of fleets and percent of acquisition have to be zero emission reefers. The reason many of the enforcement was delayed is because there is a limited availability of electric reefers. Some of our great partners at Thermo King and Carrier have wonderful products that were designed to operate on battery electric trucks, not on diesel trucks. Therefore, there's a limited number of battery electric trucks available, and you couldn't meet some of the requirements to operate an electric reefer. As a result, California agreed to postpone enforcement but they did not agree to decrease the percent of fleet later. So once January 1, 2025 comes into play, the percentage requirements are going to be even higher than they were in 24. Additionally, as I already alluded to, owners of refrigerated warehouses, distribution centers, grocery stores, any organization or company that receives goods that you may deliver into California will be required to register with CARB, pay fees, and report all truck refrigeration units that operate at their facility. In other words, your truck makes a delivery to your customer, a warehouse in California, you will have to provide the registration number on your truck refrigeration unit to your customer, who will therefore have to report that to the California Air Resources Board. If that sounds a little far-reaching to you, I would agree, and that's why there's so many challenges with these rules. So you'll see turnover of at least 30% of fleet to zero-emission technology by 2025 is technically still in play, as well as all truck refrigeration units have to be zero-emission by 2029. While CARB delayed enforcement of the rule, they did not kick the can or push the percents down the line. So these percents, if CARB decides it's time to enforce this rule, will come into effect. So I alluded on the last call about some of our great partners that provide this technology. Again, the technology is available. I've seen it at the ACT meeting. It looks wonderful and works great when you're talking about a battery electric truck, because refrigeration units have always been designed to run off electricity. Think about your refrigerator in your kitchen. But the challenge for our OEM partners such as Thermo King and Carrier is the integration with the truck system and the use of the battery, so that you wouldn't get left on the side of the road without charge. The challenge if these electric refrigeration units were to be used on a diesel truck is they would need a separate battery pack, and therein lies the rub. The separate battery pack adds weight, complexity, and another charging source. So you would have to charge up your batteries for your electric reefer in addition to add diesel if you had on a diesel truck. But I did just want to mention that, the Thermo King E1000 in particular, all electric reefer, is certainly available if you were required to have a battery electric truck. And Carrier Super eCool series really looks fantastic as well. They both are going a little bit different technology to meet the requirements, but have spent a lot of time and effort in providing a product that would be applicable. I did just want to say something briefly about trailers. I'm not covering trailers in this particular presentation because the trailer rule has been in place for some time, does not require ZEVs today, but they do require certain emissions rules to be met that most of the technology that the large manufacturers are selling is met. But the rules that I showed earlier about the registration and compliance with reporting TRU numbers for trucks is similar on the trailer side. All trailer refrigeration units that run into California have to be registered with California with a CARB number that you then have to provide to the folks you're making the deliveries to. So please keep that in mind. While I'm not covering it today, I wanted to let everyone know that if you're making deliveries into California, be ready. You'll have to be registered and meeting the requirements. I do also want to say that while these regulations, in particular the TRU regulation and the trailer regulation, have not spread to other states, just keep in mind that that's an availability, that could happen. Because as you've already seen, some of the other rules have been adopted by some of the states that you might suspect: New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey. The fact that they would perhaps look at adopting other rules from CARB would not surprise me. So with that, I know that was a lot of information in 40 minutes. I would be excited to do my best to answer any questions that you might have. And if, as I said at the beginning, if I don't have the answer, we'll lean on our OEM partners to get those answers for you. So with that, Conrad, can I open it up to do my best to answer any questions?
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like Dale is raising his hand, so let me See if I can unmute him here. All right, Dale, you should be unmuted if you want to go and ask your question.
Dale might have to unmute himself though, Conrad,
Okay.
I think.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you might need to unmute yourself. Otherwise, if anyone wants to type their question into the chat box, we can go that route too.
While I'm waiting, I do just want to say too that all these rules that I covered today, you heard me mention a lot about some delayed enforcement, some court challenges, some other rule changes. Please keep in mind this is where things are at today on September 17th, not necessarily where they're going to be forever. So my friend Dale Bennett says he can't be unmuted on his end, Conrad, somehow.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if you want, feel free to type the question. Sorry about that. We do have a question from Mike Friel. Will this affect light duty trucks?
Mike, some of the rules, yes. I think you probably saw, let me see if I can jump back. There were certainly requirements for sales. Yeah, that's a good slide. I know the advanced clean truck rule, it goes all the way down to class 2B. But in addition to this, there are already separate zero emission vehicle mandates coming not only from California, but also federally on automobiles as well. So some of those automobiles regulations apply to the real smaller trucks, say pickup trucks, and then some of these regulations apply a little bit heavier trucks. Conrad, I think someone asked about new truck purchases only.
Yeah. It looks like these rules apply to new truck purchases only, correct?
So yes and no. Yes and no. Yes, if we're talking about GHG3 and those emissions rules, yes, those apply to new truck purchases. However, that's why we're asking you, please consider working with us today rather than later. The expectation is for, not surprisingly, costs to be extremely, well, let's say significantly higher than the cost of a truck today to meet the new engine technology. Our OEM partners have wonderful engineers, but that new unproven technology comes with a cost to develop and to sell. So costs are definitely going to go up. So, please keep that in mind. That's why we want to have this webinar today so you could plan ahead. And it's a great reason why if you make acquisitions, say in calendar year 2025, those trucks could take you through a lot of the initial requirements in 2027. However, some of the rules like the clean truck check, that applies to all trucks. The TRU rules are percents of fleets that you have to consider. But then most importantly, the advanced clean fleet rule also come into, well, that's percents of all new purchases. So I don't know if I really answer your question, but it depends on the specific rule that you're talking to. So.
All right. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for the question, Keith. We have another one from Jacob Eagle. So from what I'm told, California compliant ICEs are being allocated to California dealerships only, as they are significantly limited under these regulations. Will AIM have access to CA certified ICEs for 2025 through full service lease?
So yes and no. So they are, we like to call it, there's 3 tiers, if you will, and our friends at Cummins like to say 3 swim lanes. There's California only, there's California certified that I already mentioned would be required in Pennsylvania, and then there's EPA. AIM is acquiring California certified, the middle lane that we like to say, that has the California Clean Idle sticker available. So in other words, we are not, because we're not a California company, we are not required, and I'm not even sure allowed really, unless we were domiciling a vehicle in California, to buy one of those California only trucks because they are limited. But what AIM is acquiring is that middle lane with California certification that can run and can idle into California. I hope that answers your question. And I saw my friend Ken Davis had a comment up there, Conrad, about California registrations, I think.
Yeah, we actually had one right before from question from Dale Bennett. If you want to go ahead and field that, it says is the listing of Virginia as a possibility to adopt the CARB regs based on being a part of the I'm not familiar with that acronym.
Is it the Memorandum of Understanding? MOU, maybe?
Maybe.
Yeah, so Dale's my friend. Dale's my friend from the Virginia Trucking Association. Dale, I'm proud to serve on your board. Thank you. Yes, but there was also a lot of political talk, I think, from different administrations. And Dale, you and I both know what elections in the state of Virginia or the Commonwealth of Virginia can do. So I think that's based off some of the discussion politically about the potential to adopt those rules. I worry a lot more about states like Maryland and some of the other states that are more proactive about it. So that's why that was just a possibility, Dale. Just like North Carolina, there was a lot of discussion by a certain groups in North Carolina that they wanted to press hard to adopt that, and then folks from different groups were very opposed. So we'll see how that plays out. I know Dale's going to be the first to remind me, though, that the Commonwealth of Virginia did pass a rule saying that we're opposed to mandates of zero-emission vehicles. But that's why I wanted to mention the EPA GHG3 rules, though, that no matter what state we are, it's going to require manufacturers to sell a certain percent of their fleet to be zero emission. So, Dale, our friends in southwestern Virginia may have to accept a few ZEVs someday. We'll see. And then Ken Davis had a comment I saw. Conrad.
Yeah. So just said that note that the CARB rules apply to where the truck is registered, not titled.
Correct. So Ken's point, and Ken is another great friend, board member of our organization, National Lease, and very deeply involved in this information. So I appreciate Ken's insights very much. Ken is right that if a truck is registered in, like, let's say, for example, New York, okay? So if a truck is going to be registered in New York, a non-CDL truck, there are going to be requirements under ACT, the Advanced Clean Truck Rule, for the OEMs to sell percents of emission vehicles. So they could have an Ohio title, for example, in our case, but a New York registration. And as Ken says, those rules could apply.
All right. And then Tom Robinson, what I'll do is he asked if the presentation will be available to share with fleet managers. I can make Dan's presentation available in the follow-up email that I'll send out, which will also have a recording to the webinar today. And then let me go back up here. Sorry, I lost my spot. Okay, so not a question, just a statement. There is no replacement for what we do. 350 to 450 average routes. We would need 3 times the drivers and shrinking driver labor market, 3 times the equipment at 3 times the cost. Just a comment from Dave.
I don't disagree. I will say this too. Again, not to be political, but I saw a note from my friend Kenny Tyrone too. If you are operating in any of these states, in particular Massachusetts, New Jersey, or New York, I'm going to urge you to be involved, let your voice be heard. Write a letter, express your opinion to those states, to the governors, to your elected officials. Please let them know your opinion on these rules and how adoption of these rules might impact your business, just as the last statement said. So not to be overly political on this, but I think no matter what party you are, there's always unintended consequences. I'll tell a quick story, if it's okay, that Ken Davis actually shared. Ken noted that the state of New York reached out to one of the OEMs to place an order for next year for snowplows, and was shocked to find out that there would be a certain percent of those snowplows that would have to be battery electric. And this is the government of the state of New York didn't know that their own state requirements required battery electric purchases. So please share your opinions and feelings.
All right. All right, then Kenneth Tyrone asked, when do you see diesel and or gasoline powered vehicles totally off the highways of the USA?
That's a tough one. Kenny asked me to look into my crystal ball. I certainly don't know. It's the stated goal of the current administration to, I think, have cars switched over by 2035, I think is their goal. And some other manufacturers have stated that it's their goal to have trucks switched over as well. I think some of our great partners at International, Freightliner, and Volvo in particular have stated corporate goals to reach, essentially zero emission or carbon emission requirements. That's really on average, I want to say. But, Kenny, I feel like whether it's state mandates or it's coming down from just simply business and environmental statements and other requirements, that we're headed that way. It's just a matter of we want to get there as smartly as possible with the right technology, because as somebody else pointed out in the comments, we have freight to deliver, and we're in the business of delivering freight and making sure that Americans can find grocery on the shelves. So,
Great point. We have another question here. Are there any rule changes or exemptions for full electric/battery vehicles when it comes to the significant weight increase to the trucks and potential need a different weight class registration?
So thank you for asking that question. That's actually something I'm not sure if any of my friends at Trala are on, but I've had these conversations with Trala to ask on Capitol Hill. To answer your question directly, the only exemption is tractor trailers get 82,000 pounds. So you get 2,000 extra pounds to register an battery electric tractor trailer, which is helpful, but the weight of a battery on a current Class 8 technology is significantly more than 2,000 pounds. However, per your statement, I agree, and this is Dan Fleming speaking, not policy. I agree that it makes sense that a non-CDL battery electric truck should not be restricted at 26,000 pounds. I agree with you that that should perhaps be at 28,000 pounds or 33,000 pounds if it were a battery electric, to help accommodate the extra weight that the batteries require. So, I'm not aware of anyone that's opposed to that rule except the folks up at DOT. So, again, we've had conversations in the industry to try to address that issue, but there hasn't been a lot of appetite.
All right, thanks, Dan. Are there any more? Does anybody have any more questions? Got a little bit of time left. Really put the fire to Dan's feet here.
I'm trying my best. I just want to say again, though, even if you don't get a question in right now, I'm available. If you can always reach me through Conrad, as he said, or through your AIM sales professional. Trust me when I tell you, they all have me on speed dial, and they're happy to reach out and get me involved. I was really thrilled to participate on a conference call with our friends out in Arizona. We had a call with a great customer of ours out there, and hopefully cleared up some questions they had. I know there's so much coverage of this in the press that is not wrong, just generic, that when you get into your unique situations, certain rules may apply to you differently than you might think based on reading the press. So please, let's have a conversation. Reach out to your AIM sales professional. They'll get me involved. We'll get our OEM partners involved to help address your unique situation and try to craft a strategy to prepare you for some of these upcoming rules.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well then I guess we'll go ahead and wrap it up. So just want to say that in the coming days you'll receive a follow-up email from me, and that will, like I said before, it'll have a recording to today's webinar, and then also a copy of Dan's presentation that you're free to share with anyone at your organization. And if you want to look into full service leasing to get ahead of the 2027 emission regulation deadline, we're of course happy to help. And that's all we have for you today. So thank you again for joining us. And thank you so much, Dan, for putting this together. You provided a wealth of information and a lot of great takeaways here. So thank you very much.
Appreciate everyone's time. Have a good day.